Welcome to CPAC Now America UnCanceled. I got to tell you, Matt and I, we do have a lot of fun doing this show, but lately we've been having laughing attacks right before the show starts, and Regina, our executive producer, is not a big fan of that. But we have a lot to talk about tonight. But Matt, you heard about the congressional baseball game. I heard the Republicans won, and there was this great home run by Congressman Steube.
Yeah,
right?
Greg Steube, a great conservative congressman who always speaks at CPAC, and he has a nice swing at the plate, too. He hit it outside the park home run, which hasn't happened in the congressional baseball game for a long time because, let's face it, there's a lot of geezers who play in the in the congressional baseball game. No, it's a great game. It's for charity, and there was the great tragedy a couple years ago where the Republicans who were practicing literally right near our office, a deranged left-wing madman came and shot up the place, and several people got hurt, especially Steve Scalise, who has this miracle story. He can walk now, and he's come back, and he, of course, was holding the championship trophy.
You put up the Steube home run on Twitter, and what was your tweet?
It looks like next year, folks, and it's true. This was, I think, symbolic of the fact that the Republicans are going to hit an outside-the-park home run in next year's election. Now, we can all have this conversation. Is that because the Republicans in Congress are so perfect, which maybe we wouldn't say, but what the Democrats are doing is so radical that it just won't be popular in the places that will determine these congressional majorities.
Well, who do we have on the show tonight?
Well, we're going to see a great video when you and I are done kind of bantering. What do we call this, banter?
I don't know.
We'll
call it banter.
We have a great video.
It sounds like our dinner conversation most days, but that's
we have a great
story.
video about the impacts of these radical proposals to make fossil fuels essentially illegal. The impact it's having on Virginia families and Virginia voters. And we have Terry Johnson, who's a longtime friend of ours, who's an advisor to the Glenn Youngkin campaign. And we have Mark Morano, who wrote a great book on how the Green New Deal is really all about a lie. And we'll have a great conversation.
Yeah, but before we get to this interview, Matt, we've got these spending bills. There's a lot of infighting happening. In fact, you had someone from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they've become very left-wing, I have to say, attack you, literally connect ACU to AOC. I don't know how that's possible. They just changed a couple letters. What do you think?
It won't be surprising to our audience that that CPAC came out against these big spending bills, which are essentially linked. That's one of the reasons why the infrastructure bill should not have been supported by all these Republicans, because the left-wing Democrats are saying you really got to pass this so that we get both. We get the $3.5 trillion budget-busting bill, and we get the infrastructure bill, which is not about infrastructure. It's like 5 or 10 or 11% infrastructure. The rest of it is just big government spending. And so the Chamber of Commerce, which now I like to call the Chamberlain of Commerce, after Neville Chamberlain, just giving in to the radicals. That's what the Chamber of Commerce does now. They represent woke corporations. They push woke policies. And they used to stand up for lower taxes, less regulation, and good judges. And they are now a political enemy of Republicans and definitely conservatives. So my former buddy, who I worked with on the 4th floor of Cannon, I worked for Todd Tiahrt. He worked for the late, great Dr. Tom Coburn. He's tweeting at me, chastising me for standing with AOC against the transportation bill. Of course, AOC's doing it because she wants to spend even more. We're doing it because we don't like this linkage between the two bills. So I told him, as they say in Darth Vader, to Neil Bradley, who tweeted this at me, it's just like Star Wars. I still see some good in him. Come back, Neil. Come back to the side where Dr. Coburn would have been fighting to have reasonable levels of spending. And just because you're getting a big paycheck doesn't mean you should give up on America.
Yes, do not sell your soul to the left. That's the one thing I can tell you. Anyways, we'll be right back with this great interview that we have coming up next.
You know, I've heard that solar power may be good for producing electricity here in Virginia.
But there are some things that I didn't know.
I didn't know that Democrats pushed through a law requiring that all our electricity will be generated by solar and wind.
I didn't know that this law will increase my electric bill by $800 a year.
This is your paycheck.
After paying for wind and solar. I didn't know that the law required clear-cutting our forests and farmlands.
Almost 500 square miles.
That's 25 million trees.
20 times the size of New York City. there won't be a single tree left standing.
100 million solar panels in Virginia's countryside.
They're all made in China.
All with toxic chemicals.
Copper selenide.
Silicon tetrachloride.
Cadmium telluride. That one can cause cancer.
Wait, what?
I didn't know that solar and wind don't work in bad weather.
Like in Texas, when everything froze up.
Nobody told me any of this stuff.
But now I know.
This law is bad for people.
It's bad for your paycheck.
And bad for the environment.
Democrats made this mess.
And now it's time for Republicans to clean it up.
If you ask me,
Let's start with the election in November.
Republicans want responsible, clean energy for Virginia, for our future.
Welcome back to CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. We have talked so many times on this show about the fraud of the environmental movement's attempt to try to make energy a lot more expensive, which is really hard on hardworking men and women across the country. But there's a particular impact on the Commonwealth of Virginia, which has a big election literally days away. I'm pleased to be joined by the author of the book Green Fraud, can't have a better title than that, Mark Morano, and by my good friend Terry Johnson, who's a senior advisor to the Glenn Youngkin for Governor campaign. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I know you have a lot more credentials than just those, but since this is what we're talking about, since we have this election campaign, which is really looking very, very good for Glenn Youngkin, the Republican, taking on Terry McAuliffe, who was the former DNC chair, former governor of the Commonwealth, who's kind of an old-time liberal. How does the Green New Deal and all these policies, how does that impact the election?
The way it impacts it is that the Democrats decided in 2020 to pass a law called the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which of course it's a Democrat law, so it's totally mislabeled. It's not clean at all. Yeah. We decided, a group of us who are Republican supporters in Northern Virginia, to look into this and actually document the things that it does, which nobody really knows about. So in looking into it, we found out a couple of things. Number one, it's going to introduce incredible grid instability because everything—
Blackouts, brownouts,
et cetera, is going to be introduced because everything produced electricity-wise is going to have to be wind and solar in the future, which is a recipe for a disaster. Second thing is that, as you might expect, there's going to be a very negative impact on electricity prices. The State Corporation Commission looked at it and said, okay, this is going to increase the average bill for the average Virginia family by $800 a year. We were kind of startled with that, but it's true and they documented it. Third thing is that in order to get this energy, particularly with solar, you've got to carpet the countryside with solar panels. And according to the Dominion itself, Dominion Energy, there's going to have to be 500 square miles of solar panels, which is 20 times the size of New York City, just in order to gather the sunlight needed to have solar energy. So you put all those things together, and it's a very bad situation for Virginia. And we put together a video, which I think everybody has seen, that documents this, and one which we are now distributing throughout Virginia. We will have 200,000 playthroughs of that video by Election Day in November.
It's going to make a big impact. And this, what Terry and the people in Virginia who don't want to see higher energy prices is doing, really dovetails into this constant argument, which is they say that we're going to be more energy efficient, but yet it's going to cost a lot more. And it's going to be incredibly inefficient. Yeah. So tell us, in Texas, they tried to do all this, and why during the last winter people died because they did all this.
Yeah, what happened was it's basically virtue signaling at its core. And what's happened is, first of all, the Green New Deal was introduced nationally. Notice they've never had actual hearings, an actual vote on it. It's never actually been scheduled for any kind of a vote. That's because they don't want that. They don't want that kind of—
They put a version of it, AOC did, on her website. Yes. And remember, there'd be no planes and no trains. That was awkward for her colleagues from Hawaii.
No planes, no trains. Stop
Basically,
eating meat. Farting cows.
That's
I mean,
right.
they were talking. Yeah, that was the other thing. They went after eliminating current buildings, rebuilding them into green standards. It was just like a elementary school wish list of nonsense. But what they did is they realized that, in the Biden administration realizes, every agency will be a cabinet agency. Every department is dealing with this. So they're trying to implement the Green New Deal through stealth. And part of that is what's happening at the state level in Virginia. In Pennsylvania, the governor there is doing regional greenhouse gas. They're turning the miracle of Pennsylvania's fracking, which has helped the United States lead the world in reducing CO2. If you actually care about CO2 emissions, you would want fossil fuel energy like fracking. Instead, all of these baby Green New Deals, which they're implementing at the state level, are crushing it. And what's happened in Texas is they allowed solar and wind mandates to grow up. And when the energy got to increase their energy grid, the percentage of it, so when the cold weather hit, solar wind were the worst performing of all the energy in Texas as they faced blackouts. Same things happen in California. That's every state's future who goes down the path that Virginia wants to. And essentially, it's 4% of our energy nationally is solar and wind. They want to turn that 4% of our energy production somehow to replace 80% of fossil fuels. It's a fantasy land. It's a way to get power, and it's a way that politicians can then use it to subsidize people who have to pay higher energy. And
Terry, what are you seeing on the ground in Virginia? This is the most important race in the country, which is why Democrats really aren't talking about the race, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, if they're helping, you don't see them too much. Yeah. And Terry McAuliffe didn't even bring up Joe Biden's name the other day in the debate. Is the critical race theory, the idea of socialism, higher taxes, unlimited spending, and then the idea that the staples of your life, think about if you're a middle-class family, paying for energy is one of your big costs, filling up the tank, diesel, gasoline. How is this impacting people in Virginia? Is it going to be a big issue in the race?
Yeah, it is a big issue. And the good news is that in Virginia, the Republicans are taking this issue head on. Glenn Youngkin, candidate for governor, gets this completely. And coming from the private sector, he knows how things actually work, as opposed to Mr. McAuliffe, who doesn't really understand how electricity works. So what you have in Virginia, not only with Glenn Youngkin, but with the other folks who are running, they both are on board with the notion that Republicans need to take this head on, not back away from it, not to say, oh gosh, we're so sorry, we need to reduce emissions and stuff, but to say, this is what it's going to do to you. This is what the potential impact is on you, on your pocketbook, and on your electricity, and on your landscape, and on your environment.
So in the book, you talk about, Mark, this costing something like $93 trillion over 10 years, which I think it'll be more, but I'm always dubious that they get these numbers right. Yes. But the reason is that when we have real reductions in pollution, it's because we cut taxes and make it possible for companies to actually get the next generation of filters or instruments so that they don't use so much energy or so much dirty energy. That's what really has an impact on pollution. What they want to do is shift. They want to say this form of energy is bad, sinful. This form of energy is good, but there's no science behind it. Why don't they follow the science?
They never follow the science.
But they always tell us that we don't follow the science.
It's exactly right. I guess it's gaslighting or something where they try to impose that. But if you look at what the Green New Deal is trying to do, it's an impossibility of physics. But they even admit it, because when you press them, they'll tell you this is actually not about climate, energy. It's about a remaking of America. And it's a way to sell socialism with a climate scare. And that's where the ultimate heart of this is. But on the national level, we have Joe Biden now, because he's following the Green New Deal, shutting down pipelines, going after fracking, death of 1,000 cuts, affecting our gas production, begging OPEC to increase oil production. We have Russian oil imports at an 11-year high, possibly going to an all-time high. We have all the solar wind mandates making us what? Dependent on China, using slave labor in China, buying up Africa, using child labor to mine all of the rare earths necessary. So John Kerry loves to say, Biden's climate envoy, climate is a national security threat. No, the Green New Deal and Biden's climate policy are the greatest national security threat we're facing right now. And it is a very real problem. And they're going to remake America, because enough they're trying to remake America because enough virtue signaling politicians go along with this because it all sounds good. You know, oh, by 2050 we'll be, you know, carbon neutral or zero carbon. It's all nonsense. It's not achievable under any vision of America that we'd want to.
John Kerry goes over to meet with the Chinese
and gives them a pass on all their violations.
And says, hey, we got to sign up for all these global ideas of constraining our carbon. But they don't even send out a minister to meet with him.
They don't.
He's got the title czar.
They gave the Taliban more presence than John Kerry. They met with the Taliban in person. Kerry gets a Zoom call or something, or an assistant. But that's and John Kerry wants to give them a complete pass. China's building one coal plant a week on average. They're laughing at the.
I'm told $51 billion of coal projects. So you've been in business a long time. You know that when there's a commodity that has a value, the United States of America or France can say, hey, we think that commodity is bad. By the way, I don't know what other commodity there is they've ever said is bad, but that commodity is bad and we shouldn't use it. That doesn't mean someone else doesn't use it.
No, not at all. Here's the interesting thing about what's happened politically in Virginia. You know, the old saw is, well, the Democrats are for the little guy. You know, we're going to take care of the little person. Well, actually, what's happening is that those are the people who are getting hurt the most by this. Those are the people who are kind of forgotten about everything. They are seniors on a fixed income. They are disadvantaged communities. They're low-income communities. They're communities of color.
Immigrants.
Right. All of those communities are getting hurt the worst. And finally, it seems that they are getting educated enough to say, you know, we'll believe you when you put away your SUV. We'll believe you when you stop, you know, with your yacht. We'll believe you when you stop flying. We'll believe you, you know, when you actually do things that are going to convince us that there is a crisis. Otherwise, we're done. We're not going to do it anymore, and we're going to think about voting Republican because they're.
So let me ask you this, Terry. Since you're an advisor to Glenn Youngkin, do you think parents should have the ability to say whether or not their kids read Mark's book?
I certainly do. Mr. McAuliffe may disagree with that because he said parents are not supposed to be in charge of what their children read. But,
or even their education.
Or even their education, but I would advise everyone to read that book.
Where do you get the book?
You can still get it on Amazon, although there have been multiple attempts to ban it. It's also available at Barnes & Noble.
You have AOC on the cover. Why would they want to ban this beautiful book? It's a great book. Where do you say, Barnes & Noble?
Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Amazon. It's available wherever fine books are sold.
And what's your prediction? We have the legislation for the budget going through Congress. The evil word reconciliation, which means just a majority of votes gets it through. We have this transportation bill, which has a lot of the Green New Deal in it. We have the reconciliation, which a lot of us fear will eventually have a lot of the Green New Deal in it. What's your prediction on how much of the Green New Deal, even though it's not all written down, but the concepts get into these two pieces of legislation, and finally, will they even pass?
Well, you know, obviously a lot comes down to Manchin and Sinema, but I think what they're doing is...
And AOC. Because she's really not going along either.
No, this is a great thing that's happening for freedom, is that all the infighting among progressives and the Democrats could derail this. But the original infrastructure bill was less than 10%, 5% by some estimates, of actual traditional infrastructure. Right. Instead, this is all dealing with things like equity, elder care, child care. It's just to the point where it's not related to anything you could even say is the Green New Deal. But I don't know. I think what's going to happen is with the Biden administration doing every agency a climate agency, and whatever does end up passing, the way they interpret it, they'll just turn it into whatever they want and challenge courts to try to stop them. So all they need is a bill that says we're going to do infrastructure, and then they can redefine. They've actually bragged they're going to redefine what the word infrastructure means. So this is going to be court battles ultimately. And the subtitles of the book is "It's Worse Than You Thought" for one reason. COVID-19 lockdowns have given the left essentially the one-party vision. They've praised China for decades. Tom Friedman, the UN climate chief. And COVID has given them, with unelected bureaucrats, essentially, when you declare an emergency, the ability to implement all of these. That's just how Terry McAuliffe says it's not up to parents. It's now up to the unelected bureaucrats, and that's what we're seeing in climate. And that's what makes climate agenda so hard to fight now, because they can do this through the administrative state, and you can't even, there's not even a vote in typical, the most significant.
Does Glenn Youngkin win?
Glenn Youngkin is on the path to win. If the turnout is good, Glenn Youngkin is going to win, and Winsome Sears is going to win, and Jason Miyares is going to win too.
So, folks, if Virginia turns back from being blue and comes back to being purple and reddish, that's a real message for next year. Mark and Terry, we appreciate you joining us on CPAC Now America UnCanceled. We appreciate all you do for America and for preaching the truth and for teaching our kids, which we got to do, which is the most important thing. We're going to be right back with the show after the short break.
You know, that partisan January 6th committee came out with more names of people that they've subpoenaed, some Trump staffers. And I would say they were pretty low-level, young staffers, event planners. Literally, they're going after these kids to try to get information on what happened on January 6th. I got to tell you, Matt, I'm watching this happen. You know, it's having these young people have to pay these enormous legal bills so that they can defend themselves. So that they can so that the Democrats can basically make a mockery of the process, because we know that they're digging deep, trying to blame what happened on January 6th to Donald Trump.
Well, these young kids need legal resources, and we're going to help make sure that happens. But you know, I kind of wonder. We have all this talk about 1/6, which was essentially a demonstration gone awry about what happened during the election. Strange. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook spends $400 million. Has there been a hearing on the $400 million and how that was used to facilitate unprecedented levels of illegal ballots, which were never checked? How about George Soros? He spent a few $1 billion to upset our political environment and to elect all these politicized prosecutors. Has he ever been called in to testify before Congress? Why is it that Republicans never call in their bad actors and hold them to account? But yet bad Republicans work with left-wing Democrats to try to kill every Republican, every Trump supporter. How do I know this? They did the same thing when I worked for President Bush. They call you into investigation after investigation. You remember those years. It's pretty scary for young people.
Very scary, very stressful. And it's these Democrats trying to intimidate these young staffers. And quite frankly, I think the Republican leadership needs to stand up and stop this crazy process, political witch hunt that the Select Committee is pursuing.
House Republicans, we need to hear from you. Do you think it's appropriate the way they're running this committee? If you don't, speak up. Just like all Americans, it's a time to speak up.
Yep. All right.
Are you closing or am I closing? You want me to close? You'll let me close the show?
Go ahead, yes.
Thanks for, we're not closing the show. We are closing the show.
Yes, we are closing the show.
Thanks for watching CPAC Now America UnCanceled. Remember, if you don't want to pay higher gasoline prices and home heating bill prices and air conditioning prices in the Commonwealth of Virginia, make sure the Republican Glenn Youngkin wins that race.
That's right.
Thanks for watching.
Good night.